Hello and welcome to Decoding Risk, where we give you expert insights on trending topics in the insurance industry. I'm your host, Edward Pronley, one of the marketing content managers here at Fusable, and today we're talking about a policy change to out-of-service violations going into effect later this month, and how that change will affect those in the commercial trucking space. Joining us for our episode today is Chad Krueger, our Vice President and Managing Director of our Risk Intelligence Division here at Fusable. Welcome, Chad.
Glad to be here.
Now, you've been a guest on here before, but do you mind just giving us a quick overview again on your background in the trucking insurance space?
Absolutely. I've got a degree in occupational health and safety, and I started out my career as a safety director for a trucking company. And from there, I moved into the insurance agency and insurance carrier realm, where I focused on injury and crash prevention as it relates to motor carriers and fleets. And that's how I got involved with interpreting regulations, helping people understand the regulations, and how I eventually came in contact with Central Analysis Bureau.
Well, great. Well, sounds like it's going to be a great discussion then today. So let's dive right in. Can you kind of walk us through how the policy is changing this summer compared to what it's been for the past, I think, 8 or so years now?
Yeah, English language proficiency has become a hot topic recently with some of the changes going on. And believe it or not, English language proficiency goes all the way back to the 30s when the trucking industry was first getting started. The out of service criteria for this was actually put into place in the about 2005 timeframe. It took effect in about 2007 and was in effect until about 2016. And basically what that meant was if a driver couldn't communicate in English, they were placed out of service, which meant the truck was stopped and basically the driver was put out of service and they could no longer operate the truck. The truck could continue on, but another driver had to take over that particular delivery or that particular route. With the changes in 2016, they removed it being an out of service criteria. And even during that time, it was kind of left up to the individual roadside inspector to make the determination for whether that was an out of service violation or not. But again, from 2007 to about 2016, it was an out of service criteria.
What's prompted the FMCSA to add English language proficiencies back into the out of service violations?
So basically, the current administration deemed that English language proficiency was a very important part of roadway safety. And they decided to basically, through an executive order and then a follow-up regulation change put into place by the Department of Transportation and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, to reinstate that out-of-service criteria for that. It goes to being able to get a CDL, you need to be able to understand the English language, and you need to read in the English language. And then it gets to the point of being a bit of a safety issue, because part of the criteria that they recently put in place that will take effect at the end of the month, one of the steps is being able to understand road signs. Seems like something that would be pretty important on the safety on the roadside, that you'd be able to understand what a stop sign or a yield sign or highway direction signs for that matter.
So, kind of what prompted this conversation was an article that Scopolitis put out talking about this new policy change. And they included some data that they actually used from our company from here at Fusable. And in these graphs, it shows that when the policy was removed from out of service violations, or at least went up to the discretion of the inspector, they took kind of a nosedive in terms of how many people were put out of service. So, do we know how this policy change might affect violation trends moving forward?
I would guess that going forward, the violations being an out of service again, and the FMCSA through the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, the people who train the roadside inspectors and put out the regulations and the criteria on how they need to enforce the regulations. I would anticipate the out of service violations for English language proficiency would go up. There is a definite probability that that will take place. There's still violations being issued for this currently. It's just that they're not being put out of service.
Okay. So, from an insurer's perspective, someone who is insuring these motor carriers, what might they be looking at or what might they expect moving forward with a potential spike in violations?
Yes, and from the standpoint of roadside inspections, and the way it's going to work is that the roadside inspector will initiate an English only interview to assess verbal comprehension, and what they don't want and what's kind of been acceptable in the past is using like Google Translate or something to that effect to get the communication done and the communication across. But from the standpoint of an insurer out there, what you're going to see is potential for basically trucks to be stopped, and then the trucks being parked until they can get in, someone with proficient English language to be able to drive that vehicle. And from a law standpoint, there are potential issues out there with inland marine, motor truck cargo, and things like that. Cargo at rest is cargo at risk. So if a vehicle is parked now, if a vehicle is shut down at a scale house, that's probably relatively well protected, but there are issues with potential spoilage and different stuff like that out there as well too. Other things that we've seen is that we've got clients that do data studies with our information and the data we've collected. We've got decades and decades of data, and clients do studies with that information. And we have been told about examples where this is a type of a violation that an organization will look for because they've matched the data and determined it to be actually a potential indicator for a loss or for a crash. And again, going back to being able to understand roadsides or construction zones or speed signs and different things like that, you could see how someone who isn't able to comprehend or read English could become a safety hazard out there, and then result in a potential loss.
So on the flip side, how is this going to affect carriers specifically? Obviously it's going to affect their violations, but how are those violations then going to in turn affect their insurance policy or their relationship with their insurers?
Yeah, for a motor carrier that starts to see a number of these violations and being put out of service, those have heavier weightings for that, whether it be their basic scores or anything like that out there, or just insurers that are reviewing violations associated with a particular motor carrier. Those out of service violations basically get two additional points when it comes to the calculation of their score. So it could cause them to raise their score. It could cause them to be placed into a potentially a higher peer group, which again could reflect negatively on their basic scores and preclude what type of options they might have out there with insurers that want to look at their policy basically and insure them.
Okay, so is there any way that motor carriers can kind of start to prepare for a potential trend and increase in these out of service violations?
Yeah, I think the CVSA has put out their out of service criteria. There's it's a 49 CFR 391.11 B2 is the regulation, but there's been a number of very good articles, one by our own commercial carrier journal, that talks about this and talks about the potential enforcement of it. But I think a motor carrier out there, a fleet that's trying to get their arms around this, they basically need to ensure that their employees can understand and comprehend English and understand road signs. So when they're going through the hiring process or the evaluation process of bringing their drivers on to their fleet, those are definite things that they may want to add or reinforce in their hiring process to ensure that those drivers, if they are pulled over, or if they do go through an inspection or a scale, that driver is going to be able to communicate with that inspector. Again, talk about where they're going, where they're coming from, just average things that they would need to talk about at a roadside inspection, and then again be able to understand those roadsides out there. So I think that there's a couple of things, because that's basically the two-phase roadside test that's been communicated to the industry. Again, that English only interview to assess the verbal comprehension. And then there's a potential of an optional evaluation of the driver's ability to understand highway signs, including electronic message boards. So those electronic message boards can say all kinds of different things. They could be amber alerts, or they could be traffic hazards coming up along the road, or rerouting and different things like that. So it's definitely something that a motor carrier, a fleet, is going to want to probably change their approach to their hiring process within their fleet.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps up all the questions I had for us today. I really appreciate your time, Chad. For those of you listening, we will link the Scopelitis article and that CCJ article that you mentioned in the resources below. And we'll have another episode of Decoding Risk for you next month. Thank you so much again, Chad.
No problem. Glad to be a part of it.